evening, everyone. I'm particularly excited to be discussing governance with you because it's a newer topic for Singularity to bite off and attempt to tackle. Even 2 years ago, it wasn't on our radar. A year ago, we were calling it society in transition and bundling all sorts of things under that category. But it became increasingly apparent that a number of the impacts that we wanted to have and the solutions that we wanted to bring about could be amplified and accelerated by also supporting not just government, but governance more broadly. And so to that end, we formulated this framework for governance, the grand challenge, saying that for us, it means creating a world with equitable participation of all people in formal and societal governance in accordance with principles of justice and individual rights, free from discrimination and identity-based prejudices, and able to meet the needs of an exponentially changing world. So there's a whole bunch packed into that, and I want to give a little flyby of what we mean and emphasize around those terms. The notion of equitable participation may be relatively straightforward. We're looking at the unacceptability of governance and government models that are continuing to marginalize groups, where whether it be giant pay gaps and opportunity gaps for women or for refugees or for the stateless or for disabled people, that sort of decision-making apparatus, the type that excludes people based on their identity, is no longer satisfactory. It's also not efficient. It's also not likely to help us solve problems quickly. And I like the way that we tacked on at the end this notion of government specifically being up to the challenge of the rate of change in the world. Because for Singularity, it marked a pivot in our discussion of government from one where we write off the very possibility that it belongs in the equation, that where we just have a vote of no confidence in its future, and say, what would it look like to bring government along and governance along with us as technology changes? And so if you look around the world, you might think, all right, there are quantifiably more democracies now than there were a while ago. But 1/3 of the countries in the world are still not even nominally democratic. And over the last 60 years, we have had a decline in global voter turnout. Even as we've added democracies to the register, we have lower and lower levels of voting, and that is especially pronounced in developed countries. So when you start trying to unpack why that is, one of the culprits quickly becomes the concept of representative democracy. Adding representative before democracy hasn't turned out to be the brightest thing we ever came up with. The idea of getting to choose maybe once every 4 or 5 years from a small, sad field of bad leaders that are then stuck representing you for that entire time is understandably disappointing and underwhelming, especially to younger and more digitally tech-savvy people who are used to giving real-time feedback and seeing changes happen within a day or a week. So a number of the companies that applied for this challenge and a number of the thought leaders that we've brought in on governance are interested more in like delegative democracy, the idea that you might empower somebody to represent you on a particular issue, but only as long as they stick to the principles that made you select them. So you can retract your vote in real time if you feel like you're being betrayed by not your representative, but your delegate. Technology is something that can enable that and make it much more efficient, enable you to change where your vote goes just on a mobile phone as you're commuting to or from work. A couple of the other technologies that we're tracking in the governance space are artificial intelligence in terms of the potential that it has to model the outcome of different policies. So instead of using fear-based rhetoric and reactive freakouts about current events, we can try to be very well informed and even visionary using the best software tools that we have to develop a nuanced understanding of what our decisions mean. We're also interested in how virtual reality may help to create empathy with vulnerable populations. There are great examples of this happening even up at Davos, where before world leaders make policy about refugees, they're strapping in for a 7-minute immersive experience of living in a refugee camp. And blockchain is one of the common themes of many of the most innovative governance companies that we track. They are the idea of bringing process and putting process over politics and bringing transparency, trust, and accountability as countermeasures to corruption are things that we're extremely excited about. So I want to give our other 2 judges a moment to explain to you some of their own thinking. And first, we'll start with Natasha Kapil, who is working in innovation and entrepreneurship at the World Bank.
Hello, everyone. I'm Natasha, and I work with the World Bank Group in the Global Practice on Trade and Competitiveness. My day job really is all about supporting innovation ecosystems and young entrepreneurs and startups. So when I hear that there is a technology that might disrupt government, these are my clients and I might be out of a job very soon. But I don't think that's happening very soon. When we work with clients, our client governments, we're constantly thinking about introducing governance into the approaches and the ways that they work. And this extends from the science and research systems, how they're established, to the way that entrepreneurs are selected. And one of the principles that I believe in quite firmly is a corollary to governance, which is the principle of horizontality. I like to believe good ideas come from absolutely anywhere. And in designing programs and innovation and entrepreneurship, we try to stick to those principles, allowing entrepreneurs to emerge in pretty much any sector. That said, I think there are some very exciting global purpose or general purpose technologies that are emerging that we're all becoming very familiar with at this at the Singularity University Summit. And I was particularly moved today by some of the entrepreneurs in the governance challenge, and we'd be delighted to speak a little bit more about that. I'd like to introduce my co-judge, Fran Greaney from Deloitte Consulting.
Thank you, Natasha. So I'm in Monitor Deloitte strategy practice, and I serve public sector clients. Most of my experience in the last 25 plus years has been working with governments around the world, largely in developing countries, on economic and public sector reform programs. As our global CEO, Puneet Ranjan, says, he employs us all, both the firm and individuals, to every day make an impact that matters, impact to our clients, impact to our teams, and impact in the communities that we live and work. And nowhere is that link as direct as in serving public sector clients. So Deloitte serves clients at the national level, the state and provincial level, and the local level around the world. And we try to instill the use of technology to improve decision-making and execution of government programs. So we use data analytics to help inform policymakers and people running programs of both the effect of their programs and to be able to measure the impact of their programs. We're working with several governments using process robotics to eliminate kind of simple or redundant processes to make it both more efficient and more consistent across the constituencies. And a big theme recently has been on, you hear a lot about customer relationship. We're using digital to be citizen-centric in service delivery. The better government can deliver on the services they promise and get feedback from the citizens. So we try to instill that use of innovative technologies throughout that process. And another area is that we work is in public and private partnerships. So a lot of the innovation and a lot of financing comes from private sector, and to the extent we can make those bridges, we can have a bigger impact in each of these countries. So I was excited to be invited on this because, again, the government makes a big impact, particularly in the emerging countries. And the theme and the companies we saw presenting all touched on many of these themes that I just talked about that Deloitte is engaged in. Nathaniel?
Great, thank you. And kind of in a fitting show of different institutional working strategies, the disaster team, they told you it was tough for them to deliberate. They deliberated, and our government team took 7 times longer to come to our conclusion than the disaster team. So we thought long and hard about it, and we're excited to welcome to the stage Santiago from Democracy Earth.
All right. Let's talk about making a revolution. 500 years ago, in this continent, when the conquistadors came, they gave the natives these mirrors, these shiny mirrors where they could see their reflection while they swept their entire power system without them realizing it. Could this happen again in human civilization? Well, I'd like to argue today that it's actually happening right now. While we are being distracted by these black mirrors, our entire structure of power at a planetary scale is completely changing. Probably in high school, you learn that the world looks like this, a constellation of nation states sharing the land together. But more and more, as we dive into the age of knowledge, we are certainly living more and more in a world that looks like this. Very few players controlling our identity, and that works as a proxy to also own our thoughts. How are we going to turn the internet into a planetary bureaucracy? How we're going to turn the internet into a planetary jurisdiction, into a global commons that recognizes no borders? Well, we can make that happen. My job is to hack governments. I've been doing this for the last 4 years. It's been a roller coaster, let me tell you that. Our first approach was to do a Trojan tactic that is trying to change the system from within. We did an open source software, a very simple open source software that lets citizens get informed, debate, and vote, but it came with a political party that has candidates that are committed to always vote in Congress according to what citizens decide online. We built the party, we literally created a Trojan horse, we campaigned, we ran for elections in 2013, and we got 1.2% of the votes in the city of Buenos Aires. That's more votes than the Green Party ever had in the presidential elections in the US in the last 15 years. It's a start. And, and we're not stopping. So we didn't get the candidate elected, but the software was trialed by the city congress. We debated in the software many bills, and some of them were treated in the floor of the Congress. It was the first experience of a digital democracy in the Americas. The open source software took off. It was localized into 18 different languages. The national constitution of Tunisia was debated there. The other political parties in other countries. It became quite a success in the open source community, but we identified the real enemy that we're fighting against, and that's corruption. And especially in the developing world, I have many more stories to share out in the bar tonight, but corruption is the real enemy that we're fighting against. We did Y Combinator 2 years ago. We came to the Bay Area. We started thinking about democracy at a planetary scale, and now we're taking a new approach, the moonshot approach. Let's build something that is 10 times better than nation-state governments, and it can be done. How? Democracy.earth. That's our website. You can log into democracy.earth in your favorite browser to find more information about us. And what we're doing is bringing identity, voting, and representation, the core kernel functions of nation-state governments, by using decentralized technology like the Bitcoin blockchain. Voting is already the main interaction that we have online. We do voting every day, but this kind of voting has no institutional implications whatsoever. It's only used for editorial filtering. By working with decentralized ledgers like the Bitcoin blockchain, we can start making voting accountable. We can turn identity from passports and passwords to start having identity being owned by us, the users. We can start turning voting from an accountability that is strictly limited to central authority, and we do not know how votes are counted. This is a reality in every single place of the world. To a kind of democracy where every voter gets the right to audit the election and count the votes of every other voter. Decentralization is key for accountability and transparency in democracy. And ultimately, representation. We have spectacle politics, reality shows that are based on television mindset, with candidate politics that come from the top down. And what we're looking at is a liquid democracy where you can vote directly on the issues you care, or delegate your voting trust to someone you know, to a peer, a colleague, a friend, not some reality show candidate that you find on TV. Now, thank you. Go to vote. Remember to vote. I'm not talking about liquid democracy, representative democracy, direct democracy. I'm talking about democracy, period. Democracy is the one exception to all the other ideologies out there. It's always a work in progress. It's an incomplete idea because it's the one idea that keeps us thinking about ideas. And it's the driving force of progress throughout history. And we can bring democracy to the internet age. You may say, I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. Thank you. All right.